Good morning, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here today and to have the opportunity to talk at this first conference. As Joyce says, I've been designing football stadiums for the last 25 years, and I'm going to talk to you today about some of the detailed issues that we have to take into consideration during the process of design. We've worked, my practice KSS has worked throughout the United Kingdom, Europe and throughout the world. And there's no doubt that today the guidance produced in the United Kingdom on accessible stadia is among the best anywhere in the world. And very similar to the Green Guide that was published in the early 1990s, which set all the design guidance for the design of stadia following the various horrendous events in stadium that we had in the UK and elsewhere in Europe during that period. We've been quite fortunate in the United Kingdom in that we've been able to renew most of our football stadiums over the last decade or so, and that's allowed us to gain a lot of knowledge and, to be frank, to learn a lot of lessons. Stadia renewal is now sweeping across Europe, and hopefully this forum can roll out that detailed knowledge in terms of accessible stadia throughout Europe and particularly further afield in Eastern Europe and elsewhere in the world. And as Ben said, the guide that's just being launched today will help that. As sports architects, we are essentially designing sports experiences for both spectators and athletes alike. We want these experiences to be truly enjoyable, of the highest quality for everybody attending that event and watching the various media. We want to capture those happy moments, the sad moments, and the I was there moments. Being able to capture these special moments makes for a popular and successful venue. It's all sustainable as well in terms of business, because the venue's vitality and viability depends on the reputation of being a great venue, providing a wonderful experience as well as wonderful football, hopefully, which brings in the highest capacity crowds week after week and leads to all those other good peripheral sales and all the other aspects of the stadium. But as Ben says, to have a great experience, you need to have an easy journey. Short queuing, adequate space on the concourses, good food and beverages, good information, and of course, and perhaps more importantly, a great view of the action. For everyone to have this great day out, we must have an inclusive mindset right from the earliest conceptual design stage. It is, of course, more difficult when we're looking at older stadiums to bring these completely up to the new standards. But in a new stadium, there simply isn't any excuse for getting it right. However, again, as Ben touched on, I think it's fair to say that very few of the new stadiums that are being delivered, perhaps in the last 15 years or so, have been truly inclusive or take a respectful design approach to people with disabilities. In this country, the accessible stadia legislation and guidelines, of which there are plenty, are clearly worded, prescriptive, and totally necessary. We can see that there are hard commercial pressures at play here, and not every client, not just in football, have an inclusive mindset all the time. And we as designers have a responsibility to ensure that our clients also think about these issues. Therefore, joint consultation with the key stakeholders at the earliest stage of the design process, together with a good understanding of the ground rules of accessibility, are essential if we're going to provide and protect the necessary facilities for disabled people. This comfortable and memorable live sporting experience should begin the moment you leave your door. and we have to make sure that we design easy access pathways from the home to the seat and back again, with the ability to stay comfortable, well informed, fed and watered, and of course entertained. Transport strategies, all the various blue badge parking, new bus, cycle, walking routes, are all relevant considerations, but we have to be realistic about what we as stadium designers can actually control in the design process. And for us, really, the event experience and the designing of that experience begins at the medium range approach to the stadium. So of course, all stadia approaches and concourses should be completely smooth and free from any steps to avoid any trip hazards when you're in a big crowd. This also aids wheelchair circulation a lot, but can be quite a challenge to achieve in a steeply sloping site. At the new Amex Community Stadium, which we've just delivered in Brighton, we had a 14-metre fall across the site. And so we had to slope virtually every single area of the external concourses and control and set out the approach routes from up to 200 metres away from the stadium just to resolve acceptable circulation. Now, we took a lot of care in this design. We consulted widely with the fans, and we thought we got this smoothing process completely spot on, until it was pointed out to us that wheelchair-capable taxi ramps are sometimes geared to only go down to pavement level and not to ground level. So we should have put a piece of pavement in, clearly designed for taxi drop-off, and then ramped down to concourse level. A mistake. Thankfully, one that we can deal with quite quickly. But it does deliver a message to all designers. And that really is, you must never stop learning. You must never stop listening. Accessibility for all tends to focus on wheelchair accessibility, but of course it means absolutely anybody that might face a physical, sensory or intellectual barrier to access and enjoy football. So good design for young, elderly, ambulant, semi-ambulant are equal considerations, as is the provision for partially sighted or those of hard of hearing. For example, upper tiers can give a great view if you have a head for heights, but you will need to be able to manage a lot of stairs and steep rakes to get there. So you might appreciate or prefer a dedicated seating area just here, right by the vomitory, or in an area with wider seats or shallow steps. Although there are many problems of dealing with existing stadia and retrofitting them, a lot of good accessible design attributes can be achieved by overlaying detailing such as tactile surfaces, good ironmongery, colour contrast, induction loops, signing, etc. So although we cannot always change a route and we cannot always provide accessible seating in exactly the right places, invariably the signage can be a lot better. Clear wayfinding signage is key, and especially so in stadia where high crowd flows means that all signage below head level is effectively useless. In this concourse, for example, you'd have no idea where you were going, no clue at all. Arriving here as a new fan would be a very intimidating and disorientating event. Here, in contrast, is a decent, clear signage at high level makes everything so much easier. Visibility from distance matters too, where the feeling of being swept along in a crowd means you need early reassurance that you're on the right course. Clearly all of this applies to new stadia too. Providing an excellent experience for wheelchair users demands good planning right from the earliest conceptual design stage. Getting wheelchair accessibility right will drive the whole design of the stadium bowl, all the circulation widths, routes, levels, both internally and externally within the stadium. It is the starting point for what we do. Left as an afterthought, the views, the quality of the service, and the whole experience for the disabled fan will suffer and be very hard, if not impossible, to correct. Architects now have to ensure that anyone with disabilities can access all levels of a stadium, all areas of a stadium at all levels. This vastly changes the approach to the design of the Stadium Bowl, as well as the concourses and hospitality lounges. We also need to make provisions for amenity seating for taller and larger spectators, for those who are partially sighted and prefer to sit closer to the pitch to hear. We also need to make provisions for assistance dogs as appropriate, and I apologise for this next slide. And of course, dogs must do what they must do. And until the new dog training reaches new heights, this needs planning for too. So not only must we consider horizontal and vertical circulation routes for disabled spectators within a single tier, we also need to consider the routes in the upper level of a stand, and these must be carefully planned and managed to enable the safe access and egress of both able and non-able-bodied spectators. Historically, wheelchair-accessible spaces were located at the pitch side. About 20 years ago, I was working for one particular chairman who said, well, it's easy, we just put them at the front. We just get them there, we leave them there. They don't stand up, they don't cause a problem. I was utterly appalled at this whole approach, and even today we find many instances the wheelchair seating is in this position where the views are really very restricted, and particularly with the introduction of all the new advertising hoardings. It is easy to get there, but it's generally a poor provision, with a lack of perspective and access routes that are not shared by all. And these places are often poorly protected from rain. They're popular with some fans, but an unpopular Hobson's choice for most. Now with the requirements of accessible stadia, we have up to 75% of wheelchair users enjoying a better view at elevated positions and in all ticket categories. So when generating the design of the Stadium Bowl, very often the starting point of the design, as I mentioned earlier, it is vitally important to include the right number of elevated wheelchair viewing positions right at the start of the process. Unfortunately, many architects coming to stadia design for the first time, they produce nice concepts and then they try to overlay these wheelchair accessible requirements at a later stage. This never works and only leads to compromised position and facilities. The classic example is a wheelchair position situated behind regular seats at the same level. As you can imagine, when there is an exciting moment in the game or a goal is about to be scored, everybody stands up and the wheelchair user misses all the great moments and all the goals. A very poor and deeply frustrating experience. Legislation now dictates the use of supervisors, and this gives a great uninterrupted view, but these areas need careful consideration in the design from the outset. In this section we see a typical rate of seating with good sight lines. The supervisor elevates the wheelchair user and preserves a great view even if those in front are standing. But a mid-tier supervisor, such as this, directly dictates and raises the whole sightline setting out and all the rest of the seating within the bowl. There's therefore an aspect of every new stadia that needs to be planned from the very beginning, or somebody is going to want to have their money back. Planning the bowl to accommodate the right provision for people with disabilities at an early stage is well illustrated here, when we see 12 typical stadium seats in plan view. Now we overlay this with a wheelchair viewing position and companion seat, with a decent space to manoeuvre and pass behind, and you can see the comparison. That's a ratio of 12 seats for every one disabled and every one companion seat. Clearly, we cannot design the bowl and apply wheelchair accessibility later on, because it is fundamental to the bowl generation and the overall capacity. And getting this right at the earliest moment will naturally increase the bowl size, and so it must be considered from the start. Shared access is also a key consideration. Backdoor routes, dedicated isolated circulation is just unacceptable. The ideal layout is to have a suppressed bowl, so that wheelchair-based fans arrive together with their friends and family, go directly to the concourse, and on the same level go through to their elevated wheelchair positions. A great view, easy access and egress, and a shared concourse with your friends and family, exactly as it should be. Inside the stadium, generous circulation widths need to be provided throughout, with wider ticket barriers, accessible concession provisions, accessible toilet facilities within 40 metres of seating, as well as providing decent capacity vertical circulation to all levels. Just one little detail here that's worth considering. The current standard is one accessible toilet for every 15 spectators. So you tend to see lots of single accessible toilets dotted around concourses. But if the number of spectators are greater than 15, then we should really consider designing handed pairs of accessible toilets with a left and right hand bias to accommodate different physical strengths or different disabilities. In hospitality areas, we need to provide good space standards and high-low counters designed from the outset to deliver the right service and the right message. Here we see a box at the Amex with direct rollout to a viewing position. And the Gold Lounge, high-low countering again, which is consistent at every concession and every bar throughout the stadium. We've found that some of the best wheelchair spectator positions are here in the corners at elevated positions. This gives a great perspective of the game, with the added advantage that the whole game can be followed from this three-quarter viewpoint without excessive head movements. For this reason, seats in the centre of long stands, typically considered prime viewing positions, can actually be quite uncomfortable and unpopular for some wheelchair-based spectators. Coming to a live event is something that we usually do with friends and family. However, typically, with wheelchair facilities, there's usually been the provision of space for only one wheelchair and one companion. We need to ensure that the experience of all spectators is the same. As designers, we seek to look at how we can ensure wheelchair users are seated with family members or friends, rather than in a completely different area. In our designs for the new Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, we're including the flexibility to create family groupings of up to 4 people per wheelchair seat instead of the standard one. This does require some flexibility in ticketing planning, but is really not that difficult to achieve. It just needs to be thought about at an early stage. A regular excuse for poor provisions in existing stadium is that wheelchair users enjoy concession prices, a sort of second-class price for a second-class view. This is clearly totally unacceptable and not welcomed in attitude or outcome by supporters groups. A full-price ticket and an equal quality of view and experience are now expected. That's not to say that concession pricing is unwelcome, of course not, but not at the expense of the quality of the experience or the view. Many stadiums today have expanded their role outside of football and have a genuine community involvement with regular day-to-day activities. The power of the sport is now recognised as an excellent magnet for re-engagement programs for people not in employment, educational training, or supported adult learning. Stadium facilities are becoming so good that weddings, receptions, conferences, exhibitions are now regular features. Indeed, we had our first wedding at the Amex Stadium within days of the practical completion and weeks before the first match was played. Matchday hospitality rooms are now designed to be flexible function rooms of high quality. This wide market and range of uses makes accessibility to every part of the stadium even more relevant. Perhaps more importantly, the local football community also gains a greater understanding of diversity within football stadiums, reflecting the wider and inclusive society that they serve. Football supporters are themselves increasingly diverse and are becoming more and more representative of the wider European society. This naturally includes many more disabled groups who wish to attend football matches and other events and feel more comfortable about visiting the stadium on a non-match day. It is also reasonable to expect an increasing number of disabled people to work within football, and as such, clubs and stadia as employers should ensure a fully accessible working environment.